Good morning. Welcome to the second of EFSA's information sessions on the update on our guidance document on risk assessment for birds and mammals. This morning's session will be dedicated to a demonstration of the calculator associated with this particular guidance. My name is Tobin Robinson. I am the head of unit of EFSA's plants unit. That's the unit responsible for environmental risk assessment, principally linked to plant protection products, to plant health and to ecotoxicology. If I could have the next slide, please. So over the next hour and a half, we will be taking you through a introduction and a demonstration, a live demonstration of our calculator. Just to remind you that during the information session, the calculator will not be available online to people interested in trying it out. We're doing that in order to ensure that the calculator is going to be working during the information session. It will then be made available shortly after the end of the information session to you. At the end of the information session, we have a question and answer session. This is based on questions received in the registration forms from the calculator tool. And the next slide, please. And just to remind you that this information session, as for all of our information sessions, is one-way audio. That is, you, the audience, have the opportunity to listen in, but only to listen in to the presentation. The event is exclusively in English. As I mentioned, we have a question and answer session at the end, which is based on questions collected from the registration forms, and we will do our best to provide full answers to those questions. The good news is the event is being recorded. The recordings will be published in the days following the end of this meeting, of this information session, so you will be able to revisit the information session, but also share it with colleagues who were not able to attend live. And as for all of our information sessions, shortly after the close, we will be sending out by email a survey to you for you to evaluate the session. The feedback is important for us, so I would ask you please to take the time to fill in the survey. It helps us to improve the service that we provide to you. On the next slide, please. So just to remind you, the calculator that you'll be seeing today is available on our website. We have the link in the slide here for you to be able to access it. It's related to the guidance document, and if you're at the information session yesterday, you will have heard that we are waiting on the next step in the approval of the document, which means it's going to the PAF committee, who will hopefully give their blessing to the document and then indicate the time for its implementation. In the period between now and the implementation of the guidance document, we will be continuing to carry out improvements on the calculator that we'll be presenting today. And this covers the screening of tiers 1, 2 and 3. It also covers multiple substances, and it covers secondary poisoning, metabolites and risk via consumption of contaminated water. So just before we get into the demonstration, I'm very happy to tell you that today we have 2 members from EFSA staff who will be taking you through the material. We have with us today Rachel Sharp, who is the scientific coordinator for this activity. Rachel's been with us for over 12 years now, with specialisation in ecotoxicology and a particular focus on pesticide peer review and related activities. In addition, we have with us Alessio Ippolito, and Alessio has been with the EFSA ecotoxicology team for more than 8 years, with a specialty in aquatic ecotoxicology and also environmental risk assessment method developments as well. So welcome to both of our colleagues. And without further ado, I will hand you over to Rachel to start taking you through the material of this morning's information session. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Tobin. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I will be sharing my screen shortly, and then I will take you through the basics of the calculator tool. Okay, so is my screen being shared? Yes, it is. Okay, so I think we can switch off the video so the colleagues can see the entire screen, and then I will start the demonstration. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you need to register for the EFSA R4EU platform. And I've already done this, but I will pretend I'm an external person, so I will use my Google account, and it should take me through to the front page where you can see all of EFSA's statistical models that are available. So down the bottom here, we have the one for birds and mammals. Now I'm launching the app. So the first page you can see is the welcome page, and here there is guidance on how to use the calculator, but I won't go through this now because we're going to show it to you. But there's a few points I would like to highlight to you. So first of all, as Tobin has said, the tool at the moment is still in the development stage, in the sense that we have got it working, the structure is there, but of course there are some bugs and issues that we need to resolve in the coming months. It was always anticipated that we would use the time between publication of the guidance and implementation of the guidance to get the calculator tool working 100%. The next point I would like to highlight to you is the fact that after 10 minutes of inactivity, the app will stop working. So it's highly recommended that you save your work, and you can do this by downloading zip files that will save your data input, so you can upload it at a later date. And I will show you how to do that during the demonstration. The next point is up here there's a button for reporting any technical issues. So for any issues that you find, that will take you to an email that will email the developers. For any general issues, I would suggest that you contact EFSA, so either me or the EFSA peer review inbox will share the links at the end of the presentation. Okay, so finally, what is nice on this page is the example product, and this loads an example that allows you to see the functionality of the tool if you don't have a particular assessment that you wanted to perform. But for now, I will restart the app, and then we can start looking at the screening level assessment. So, the other thing I would say is just take your time. There's no need to rush as you're putting the data in. Okay, so the first page, this is the data entry for the product. So the first thing you want to do is give your project name or project a name. So I will call this info session 1. As you can see, I've already practiced. And this will be used for anything that you download and your zip file. So it is a good idea to label it with something that you will remember at a later date. So the next step is you go to the tier for the dietary exposure. Now we're going to do a screening level assessment, and after you've selected that screening level assessment, it will ask you what application type you want to assess. Now, because it's for screening, we only have the option for a spray. Okay, so the final question down here, are there any experimental data for the mixture available, is not a mandatory field, so we can just ignore it for now, and I will come on to the mixed active assessments later on. So once you have entered the information on your product, you need to navigate to the next page, and there's two ways you can do that. So either you can use the navigation tools here and go forward, or alternatively, they're all listed in the drop-down menu for the data entry at the top. So at this stage, we've moved on to the active substance. So we will now enter some information for the active substance. So active substance 1. The next box that you are asked to fill is the content of the active substance in the formulation. Now, at this point, I'm going to highlight that there are several, well, there's multiple of these info boxes scattered throughout the tool, and they either direct you to the relevant section of the guidance document. So down here, you'll see, if I scroll over this info box, it says go to section 6.1.4 of the guidance. But alternatively, it might give you a hint on what is needed for this box. So you can see here, it's actually telling you that this is only needed for a mixed active formulation. So if you are only considering a single active substance in your formulation, you can put any value you want in and you can ignore it. So the next is we need to enter some toxicity data. So for the birds, we're just going to enter some values. It asks me whether it's a greater than value. So yes, it is in this case, and then I enter a reproductive value. The next question is asking me whether we should use an FTWA for the reproductive assessment for birds. So yes, in this case. For those of you who joined us yesterday, you'll understand that there's a section in the guidance document asking you to assess before using degradation in the reproductive assessment, whether it's reasonable. So in this case, we've said yes. Okay, so for mammals, I will do the same. Yes, 100, and the substance meets the criteria. So at this stage, we need to add this information to the tool. And we click the button, and then we must scroll down. And here we can check that everything has been entered correctly. So we have active substance 1, the reproductive endpoints, the acute endpoints, the substance is meeting the FTWA criteria, it's true, etc., etc. So you can also amend any of the information you put in. So say I misentered the toxicity value for mammals, I've clicked the button amend, and I re-add the data. Scroll down and you can see that that amendment has been made. And of course, the little rubbish bin means that you can get rid of the data that you've entered. So we have entered the information we need on the active substance. So we will go to the next page, which is talking about the uses. Okay, so for the uses for the screening step, there is an info box here, and it just gives you some guidance on what those crop types are. And actually, for the screening step, it's just split up into 3. So we can just pick whichever group our crop is falling into. Once we've picked that crop group, it will ask the next question is how many uses do you have? And that allows you to take into account different number of applications or different application rates for the same crop. So for now, we're just going to look at one use, but we will now need to create the gap table. So we click the button and it prompts you to complete the next stage. So for this, we just have the use type or the use, the crop type, which is already specified from what we selected earlier. The application rate, we're going to say 1 kilogram. Number of applications, we'll just stick to 1. And when you put 1 application in, you can say the interval is 0. Once we have, you can see here there's a tip. So once we have added the information, we need to save the input. And here you can check that everything has been entered correctly. Now we don't have an amendment button down here, and that's because you don't need to press the button to make any amendments. You can make any amendments to the gap table as you wish. At this point, I will show you how to save your input data. So what we should do now is go back to the product page and save the session. And we will do this multiple times throughout the demonstration. So once we've clicked save the session, it will save the zip file to wherever you are saving your information, your download information. So here on my computer, it goes straight into the downloads, and you can see here info session 1 birds and mammals, and it's given the date. Okay, and once we've saved that zip file, we're safe, because we know that if there's any problem or interruption with the tool, we can reload that information and rerun our risk assessment. But for now, we will continue with our risk assessment, and we can go to the output. So the output for the general dietary risk assessment is under general, and you can see that it's split between the birds and the mammals. So first of all, down the left-hand side here, you will see the table settings, and we've tried to be very flexible in the table settings, so you can see as much information as you want or as little information as you want. But for speed of assessment, you can also click select all. The rule is that you must select which active substance you want to assess. You must have at least one input and at least one output. And once you've selected that, all you have to do is click apply. And when you see this wheel down here, this means the calculator is doing its calculations. Okay, so now we have the screening level assessment, and you can, for birds at least, and you can see all of the information has been included in this table. And you can do the same for the mammals, and it's automatic. It has used the same inputs and outputs for the table, and you can see your screening level assessment for the mammals. Throughout the tool, you will see many of these export data to Excel buttons. I will quickly show you what that does, but I will show it in more detail when we come on to the Tier 1 risk assessment. So what that does is, sorry, Excel is just opening, give it a second. It presents that table exactly how you see it in the tool, but in Excel. And I hope you can see my Excel sheet, or you can. Okay, so the first page, or the first worksheet in the Excel, is to show you what tool you've used, the version number and the date. And then you can look at the results. So just so it's visible, you can see the titles, and then when it's a complicated assessment, you can use the filter to present your data how you want, or you can copy and paste it into your draft assessment report or your product registration. But I will show you that in a bit more detail for a more complicated assessment. Okay. So I think that is more or less the basic details of the screening level assessment. So with that, I will restart the app. So whenever you want to start a new risk assessment, you need to restart the app so it clears all of the information. So just while we give it a moment, I need to get my data for the next step. So now I'm going to take you through a Tier 1 risk assessment for a spray application. So this time it's real, so I need to look at my data. So project, we'll call this info session 2. And we want to do a dietary exposure assessment at the Tier 1. The application type now, because it's for Tier 1, we have the choice of covering sprays and seed treatments. So the tool at the moment covers sprays and seed treatment product types. So we're going to select spray. Again, I will ignore the question on the combined exposure for now because it's not necessary for the assessment that we're going to run. So next page. The active substance is exactly the same, so we'll call this active. Content is not important, so we just put any value in for now. Right, so my toxicity data for this substance is, if I remember rightly, okay, 31.28, reproductive was 1. No, it's not a greater than value, but the substance does meet the FTWA criteria. For mammals, it's 160. Again, it's quite toxic reproductively. The substance does meet the criteria. Now, for the Tier 1 risk assessment, you can see that it's asking me some information on the secondary poisoning and contaminated water. At this stage, I will just ignore that. It's not a mandatory field, but I will demonstrate that later on. So, as always, we need to add our information to the tool. So what you must do to remember to do is always scroll down, and then we can check that the information has been entered correctly. So we have active substance 1, the reproductive endpoints. Yes, it meets the FTWA criteria. We have the mammal endpoints, and then these are blank because we have not entered the information for the secondary poisoning assessment. What I should have shown you is that in the case that the LD50 divided by 10 results in a lower endpoint, then the tool will prompt you to take that value. So I will show you that quickly. So we'll click amend. So for mammals, if I say that the reproductive endpoint is not 1, it's 5, the tool will prompt me to take the LD50 divided by 10 as the standard endpoint for the reproductive assessment, because that's in line with the guidance document. But for now, we won't do that. We will save my amendment. I'm happy with everything has been entered correctly. Again, you can download your data into Excel if you want to do that. So you can copy and paste that into your assessment report. So I will quickly show you that. And you will see the exact same information as presented in the tool, but in an Excel format, so it's easy to copy and paste. And then, of course, because it's in Excel, you can make any amendments you want to make it presentable in a Word document, etc. Okay, let's close some of these, otherwise we'll end up with too many. So next is the uses. Now it's a bit more complicated for a Tier 1 risk assessment for a spray application, but it will ask you to select a crop type, and the info box will take you to the appendix of the guidance if you're not sure where your crop falls into which crop group. In the majority of cases, I think it's quite clear, but there might be some special crops that you need to consult the guidance. So this example, we are looking for sugar beet. There it is. But for my example here, which was a real one, I actually have 2 types of risk assessment I want to perform for sugar beet. So I have different application rates that I wish to take into account. So once I've said there are 2 uses, at the moment you need to click the button twice, but I think we can get that fixed, and so you can create the gap table once. So then you have seen your gap table, and it's more or less the same type of gap table that you will see in a list of endpoints or in the draft assessment report. So then it's asking you for the growth stage. So 30 to 49, the application rate was 0.2. Single application, so 0 interval, excuse me, 2.77. At this point, it's asking me for the spray drift value. Now here, I need to consult the guidance document and look at Appendix J. And for sugar beet, it will tell me that I need to use 2.77% for a single application. But there is an info box to take you to the correct section of the guidance. The next column is asking me for the spray direction. It is automatically filled out for anything other than the trees and bush type things. And that's because we've always assumed that the crop itself will be sprayed. So you can just ignore that. The final column is to allow you, it's a free text column, so you can label your risk assessment. So if you're doing a complicated assessment and you've got multiple gaps, then you can label it whatever you want. So we will call this high rate. And then I'm going to cheat, and you can use the drop down feature just as you do in Excel, except I can't do it. There we go. And it will copy all the information from the line above. But for this one, I have a different application rate. So I have amended that. Once I am happy, I can save the input. And I can double check that everything has been entered correctly. And you can see it is correct, except I should have called that flow rate. And I hope that will save. Yes, so you don't, if you need to make any amendments, you can do it directly in the gap table, but then you must click the save input and it will save it into the tool. You can also add and take away crops, but then once you've added or took away a crop, you must recreate the gap table or update the gap table. Okay, so at this point, I must remind you that we should save our session just in case the internet goes down or I do something wrong. And you can see down here, it's saved my zip file. And if I look in my downloads, it's also there. So it's saved the info session there. Okay. So once we've saved our session, we can move on to the output. And it's very similar to the one for the sprays. No, sorry, for the screening step. So you down the left-hand side, we have the options for what we want to see in our output. And then there's the lazy option where we want to see them all. So I've selected all, click apply, and the tool is calculating your risk assessment. I should have explained that there are tabs. As for the screening step, there are different tabs for birds and mammals, and there's also metabolites, combined exposure, and a summary, but I will show you them later on. So as you can see, the tool has calculated our tier 1 risk assessment. Now, because we asked the tool to present all of the inputs and all of the outputs, the table is quite large. So I will amend that to a bit more of a manageable table. So if you want to do that, it's recommended that you clear the filters so that the tool knows what you're doing. So you must select the active substance. I like the BBCH and the feeding guild, and I only want to see the dietary dose and the toxicity exposure ratios. Then I can click apply. And you can see that it will display just the inputs and outputs that you chose. Now, down the bottom is the button to export it into Excel. And because we all like to use Excel, it's my preference to look at my output in that. So again, the tool will label what your assessment has been done. So the date and the version number, so you can keep a record. And then we can use the filter buttons, or the filter, sorry, the wrong button, the filter feature in Excel, and we can just look at the assessment how we want. So we just want to look at the granivorous, you can do that, or perhaps you just want to look at those values that are less than the trigger value for the reproductive assessment. So I'm selecting all those values less than the trigger of 5, and you can see these ones require refinement in the higher tier assessment. So I will close that. We don't need to save. Back to the tool, and we will have a look at the same risk assessment for mammals. You can see here that everything is calculated. Oh, I should have shown you, if you do want to order the table within the tool, you can just click on the header and it will present them. So perhaps you want to order it via Feeding Guild, for example, and you can see them. But again, there is the button to export that information to Excel. Now, the additional aspect for the mammal risk assessment is that we need to take into account those mammals, those small generic model species that are living only in the adjacent to the crop, in the terrestrial area of interest. So down here, we have to scroll down, and you can see that for the small insectivorous, the small herbivorous, and the granivorous, they have done a risk assessment has been produced, assuming the spray drift value of 2.77, and it gives you all the results. And again, you can export that to Excel if you want to. So that was the basics of oh, I know what I forgot. I will show it on the next thing. I forgot to show you the summary, which is a nice feature of the tool, but I will show it on the seed treatment. So data entry. Okay, we will call this info session. Oh, okay, we'll just call it 3. I'm doing a tier 1, but this time it's for a seed treatment. I will still ignore the combined. Active 2. Content. Again, it doesn't matter because it's a single product, a single active substance within the product, so I can ignore that. This time 2000 for the birds reproductive is 2.5. Yes, it meets the criteria. 2000. Yes, it's a greater than. This time it's 48. And again, it meets the criteria. So I skip through. Oh, no, I can't skip through because I forgot to add. I'm going too fast. So I need to add my active substance, check everything has been entered correctly, make any amendments necessary, and then I can skip to the uses page. Now the uses are the same uses, crop groups you saw for the foliar spray. In this case, we are going to do spring sown cereals. But as a hint, as a standard assessment, you want to click there are 2 uses. And the reason for that is because of the 2 types of generic model species that you need to perform the risk assessment. So you need to perform a risk assessment for those animals eating the seeds and those animals eating the the germinating seedlings. So create the gap table. It's slightly different to a foliar spray, and it's asking me for the seed type. And this is so we can differentiate whether the animal is eating small or large seeds, the majority of which you will need to select small seeds. The application rate is 0.5. Number of applications, of course, is 1 for seed treatment. The concentration on the seed or per kilogram of seeds is 50 milligrams. And if I wanted to, it will be obvious from the tool, you don't need to label it, but just to show you that the pre-text, you can enter anything you want. So for the second use, I'm going to select germinating seedlings, And then I'm going to scroll down, use the copy button, and this time I'm going to call it seedlings. So I can then save my input, check everything is entered correctly. This time I remembered to call it something else. It's a good habit then to save the session. And then I can have a look at the output. So it's exactly the same as you saw, or more or less the same, I should say, as you saw for the foliar spray. We select all, click apply, and the tool has performed the risk assessment both for the granivorous bird eating the seeds and the omnivorous and the herbivorous consuming the germinating seedlings, as you can see. What I should have shown you before, but I won't do it now, is to allow you to quickly digest whether the risk assessment for all the generic model species are resulting in a low risk or a high risk. You can use the summary tab, and that is a summation of all the generic model species. So here you can see that we have a low risk for the spring sown cereal crop, for the seeds and the seedlings, for the acute assessment, but we have a high risk, meaning that we need a refined risk assessment for the reproductive assessment. For complicated assessments, it's a very nice feature that you can quickly digest what the outcome is. The mammals is exactly the same. We don't have the need to consider the terrestrial area of interest at the moment because we had no default values for dust drift. So at this stage, there is no need to consider it. So everything is identical. You still have the option to export the data to Excel. But I think I have shown you enough. So now I am going to show you how to upload the zip files from previously saved assessments. So what I can do is I go to the product page, and on the product page you can see it says load a zip file. So I will browse, give my computer a minute, and now it's taken me to my downloads, and you can see that yesterday I have saved some examples. And so first example I'm going to show you is a secondary poisoning, and to save some time I've already entered all of the information. So as you can see, I've uploaded the information from the zip file. So you can see that the project name, the tier is all selected, and I will go to the active substance page, and you can see down here all that information is saved. Now the only thing I should highlight to you here is that this time I have actually entered some data for the log KOW and the KOC, and you can see here that I put 4.8 in, and because 4.8 is greater than the trigger value, the tool will prompt me for a fish BCF value, and it automatically calculates the biomagnification factor that will be applied to the assessment. So I won't make that amendment now because it's already stored down here in the tool in my previous assessment. So now I need to go to the uses page, which I think you're probably quite familiar with now, but you can see this time I've done vegetable brassica crops, 2 applications, 7-day interval, spray drift. All the information is saved down the bottom. Then we need to go to the data input page for the secondary poisoning and contaminated water, and it's an optional field. So just give the tool a minute, and you can see for active substance 4, for the use one, I have entered in the input parameters that I need to perform a secondary poisoning assessment. So I have entered in the soil pore water, the soil total PEC, the BCF equilibrium time bracket. So that value is to take into account the time to equilibrium in the fish BCF study, and you can see that there's some guidance on that in footnote 39 of the guidance document. So in this case, I have said 21 days, and I put in the 21-day time-weighted average PEC surface water value. I have also put in the 7-day PEC sediment pore water and the 7-day time-weighted average sediment total PEC value. I have saved the input, and now you can see down the bottom that all of these values are presented. Sorry, that's the wrong line, it's this line. So you can then move to the General tab and you can perform your dietary risk assessment as we've previously shown you if you want to do that. The tool was thinking about it, but this time we're going to look at the secondary poisoning output. So it's similar to what you've previously seen, but there are some tabs here for the inputs and outputs. So first of all, let's have a look at the earthworm eating, and for the earthworm eating there are two options for the exposure assessment. There's the pore water approach and the dry soil approach. So we'll start off with the pore water. We've selected, we apply our filters, the tool does its thing, and you can see that the earthworm bird risk assessment has been calculated. And actually, I'm quite surprised, the fish eating bird risk assessment has also been calculated, and the benthic invertebrate eating bird risk assessment has been calculated. I didn't think that was going to happen, so we live and learn. And of course, you can see plenty of buttons to export this information to Excel. What I should have said is that during the working group meeting back in October, we invited some stakeholders to test the tool, and one of their feedback was that there were too many of these Excel spreadsheets, and they thought that it would be nice to have an overall report. So this is what we have implemented since October. So you can download one Excel spreadsheet and it will give you all the assessments that you've performed. So you can see that this is my example. I've lost Excel. Oh, there we go. And you can see that it gives the dietary assessment. We can use the wrap text and the filter, and you can look at the outcome, and it gives you the summary. And you can also see it gives you the secondary poisoning for worms, the summary, fish, the summary, and then we can scroll. And then there's the invertebrates. So they're all the assessments that we've performed so far. So don't save. Back to the secondary poisoning output. So we've looked at the pore water approach for earthworm eating. So I will clear the filters and we can have a look at the dry soil. Must remember to select all. And the calculator should calculate the dry soil approach for the earthworm eating birds and mammals. And there we go. We can check the mammals has also been performed and the values are there. And I've selected all the inputs and outputs. That's why the table is so wide. But if you wanted to reduce the number of inputs and outputs, it would become more manageable. I think that's everything I wanted to show on the secondary poisoning. So I will quickly show you the contaminated water because time is ticking and I will get in trouble with my colleague if I'm not careful. So next point I have to show you is I will upload my previously saved example, because you're probably bored of seeing me enter data. So we are now looking at the same example as before. Just give it a second. So we've still got active substance 4, but this time I've entered a soil DT50, 48.9 days. My uses, I have specifically, I hope, decided to use vegetable brassica crops above 40, so the leaf scenario is triggered, so it's necessary to perform 2 types of contaminated water assessment. And on the input page for the contaminated water, it has already told me that the screening assessment for the puddle scenario is not showing a low risk. So I put in a refined puddle PEC and the application volume. So we can have a look at the output for the contaminated water. First of all, the leaf scenario. So that's for the water that is collected in the leaves, or the spray solution rather than the water. And you can see that the assessment is calculated there. So for the birds that are consuming the spray solution collecting in the leaves, we have a low risk. And it's just an acute assessment. So then I will clear my filters and we'll have a look at the puddle scenario. Select all. And here you can see that the risk assessment has been performed for the puddle scenario for active substance 4. It's telling me that the screening is not showing a low risk. I have a refined PEC puddle and the resulting acute TER is very high, and actually so is the resulting TER for the reproductive assessment. And that's it for the contaminated water, I think. So I will restart. And what do I have next? I have metabolites. Okay, so again, I will use a previously saved example. But if I remember rightly, I've only half entered the data. So here, metabolites example tier 1, and it's a spray. We can go to our uses. Give it a second. Sorry, our active substance 4. All the data is inputted correctly. For the uses, I don't remember what I put in. I think spring sown cereal crop, just a single one. But this time we need to go to the metabolite page. And this is where we're going to enter the information for the metabolites. So first of all, you can see that it's split up into the metabolites that are occurring in the dietary items, those needing a secondary poisoning assessment, and those needing a puddle assessment. Excuse me. Right, so I will just show you an example for the dietary items, because otherwise it will be a bit boring for you. So for active substance 4, the first thing it's asking me is how many metabolites I want to assess. So I'm going to say 3, and it amends the tables. So then it wants me to label metabolites. So I'm not very imaginative with my label names, but okay. So now we have 3 metabolites for active substance 4 that are occurring in plant and triggering the need for an assessment for birds and mammals. The tool is assuming that you do not have any toxicity data for these metabolites, because that's the case more often than not. Perhaps occasionally you might have some data. So we'll pretend for metabolite 1 you do have data and it's 1,000. We can amend the assumed surrogate toxicity values, and it will automatically take it into account. So the surrogate values are those of the parent substance divided by 10, and you can find information on that in the guidance document. So finally, we can move to the next table, and it's asking me for the QMet value. Now, as I described yesterday, the QMet value is the quantity of the metabolites, and the value, the info box there is telling me that the value should be between 0 and 1, so it's 0.2, 0.5 and 0.3. The next question is, do I need to do a reproductive assessment? Like I said yesterday, in the majority of cases, probably not, but just for demonstrating, I will say for M2, for some reason, I want to do a reproductive assessment for that metabolite. So then we can move to the next page. Oh, what have I done wrong? Oh, I forgot to save my information. So of course I did that on purpose to show you that what happens if you don't save the information. And you can double check down the bottom that everything has been entered correctly. So no reproductive assessment for M1, no reproductive assessment for M3, but we want to do one for M4. So now we can look at the results. So we go back to the General tab and we can select all, and we can apply the risk assessment. And this is doing the risk assessment for the parent. I'm not sure actually if it's necessary, but it's just a habit that I have got into doing. So then we can go to the metabolites, and it is actually used the same inputs and outputs to display in the table. So you can see that the risk assessment has been performed for M1, M2, M3, and we're dealing with quite a lot of entries now. You can use the entry, show the entries as many as you want, or of course you can export it to Excel. And you can see that the risk assessment has been performed for all the metabolites, but only for M2 has the reproductive assessment been done. Okay, I think I'm done on metabolites. Final example before we move on to tier 2, tier 3 is the situation where you have multiple active substances in your product and you want to perform an assessment for all of them. So let's hope I remember to save an example. So I'm uploading something I did yesterday. Here, you may have toxicity data for the formulation. For the time being, I will say that I don't have any formulation toxicity data, so I will ignore that value. But if I click it, it will ask me what data I have. So I will unclick it just to show you the output. So as you can see here, I've got active substance 1, 2 and 3. And this is for the single substance assessment. So we can do that, and the tool will take a minute because we're now getting into complicated assessments. So you can see that the tool has done the risk assessment for the individual active substances. But if you want to perform a combined exposure assessment, so the COMBTER, you can see that the tool has also performed that assessment both for the birds and for the mammals. You can see that the tool has assumed, because we have not used any toxicity data for the mixture, the model deviation ratio, the MDR value, is 1. And you can see there's an info box directing you to the guidance document where you can find more information about how to calculate that MDR. If I go back, and I hope this works, if I go back to the product page and I change my mind and I say, actually, I do have product data, and I'm going to say for mammals, I'm going to put a very low value in just to show you. The consequences. So I will clear my filters. I will redo the assessment, And you can see now that the tool has calculated your MDR value and applied that to both the acute and the reproductive assessment. And you can see that it has had quite a severe consequence for the resulting TER values. And so that is how you perform the combined exposure assessment or the combined risk assessment for a product containing multiple active substances. And I think that is me finished. So I will thank you very much for listening, and I will hand you over to my colleague Alessio, who will show you the Tier 2 and Tier 3 aspects of the tool. Thank you very much.
So yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. And I will try to take you through now some examples relating to the Tier 2 and Tier 3. I'm going to go straight to the product tab. I'm going to start a new project. We're going to call it Tier 2, Tier 2, 3. Not much fantasy here. And here, this time we select Tier 2, Tier 3. Now, one thing that is very important to mention is that you can always switch in between Tier 1 and Tier 2, Tier 3, which you cannot really switch between the screening tier and any other tier. And that is because the input value that you need to put in is different for the users. That's something that I wanted to highlight. And we're going to make just one example for a spray application. We are going to have just one active substance, so we leave out the combined exposure for now. We'll move on. We're going to call the first the active 2. As Rachel has explained, if you don't have only one active substance, the value that you put into the content of the active substance in the formulation is not really going to be used by the tool. So we're just going to put one there. The acute endpoint for birds is 31.28 in this case, and the reproductive endpoint is 1 milligram kilogram body weight per day. We're going to flag the FTW, the meeting of the criteria for the FTW, because we want to show examples where we refine the DT50, and obviously that refinement will only be applicable if the substance fulfills the criteria for the time-weighted average. Otherwise, it will not be taken into account. The acute endpoint for mammals is 160, and the reproductive is also 1. And again, we're flagging that the substance meets the criteria to support the use of the time-weighted average. We're not going to be showing any examples of secondary poisoning or contaminated water because those are not, let's say, there's no Tier 2 in the tool. So we're simply going to add and we can check that indeed the tool saved the information for the substance in the right way. We're going to move on to the users tab. This is pretty much something that you've already seen. We're going to just have a very simple gap table with only one use. With sugar beet, BBCH in between 30 and 49, an application rate of 0.12 kilogram, but we had 2 applications with an interval of 14 days. And the spray drift for sugar beet, as Rachel already showed before, is 2.77%. We're not going to need any additional crop identifier because we're just going to have one, so that's going to be quite easy to remember. As Rachel already shown you, and now it's good practice to go back to the product. We can also do that by clicking on the home page there, and we're going to save the session just to be sure. Now we're going to move on to the general tab. And we can simply select the active, the crop, the BBCH, and the feeding yield for the input, and well, just pretty much everything for the output except the trigger values because we are quite acquainted with those. And we apply. and then the tool calculates the risk assessment. This is just to show you that, in fact, even if we are selecting the tier 2, tier 3 option, let's say, in the first entry page, we can still do a normal tier 1 risk assessment. There's no need, let's say, to swap between tier 1 if we want to do the tier 1 risk assessment. And this is the same as well for mammals. But let's now focus on the. Oh, sorry. Something that I forgot to say is that you see here there is already a legend, which is showing the color that are going to be used for highlighting rows where tier 2 or tier 3 refinement have been applied. And in this case, we haven't applied anything yet, so everything is still white. So the first thing that I would like to show you concerning tier 2 is this tab here, which is called residue dissipation. And as you can see, the interface that you have is in fact a simple table where you have a column which is named time and a column which is named measured concentrations. This is basically to entry raw data that you may have from residue trials. So I'm just going to copy paste an example. You can copy paste from any tabulated format, from Excel, from Word. So I'm just copy pasting it now. You have the time. Remember that the unit of the time is the same unit you want to express your DT50. So that's normally days. And the measured concentration can be whatever concentration, as long as it's internally consistent. It can also be simple percentage of the initial concentration. So that's pretty much what I've done here. And you have also the space for labeling the trials. Sometimes you need to remember, I don't know, the author of the study or the location. In this case, let's assume the trial was done close to Parma, here in Piacenza, and we're going to have that. The next thing you can do is to select a kinetic model for the fitting. So the default one is the single first order, which is the first one that you should always be using according to the guidance document, also according to the focus kinetic guidance document. But you can select also the first order multi-compartment and the double first order in parallel. Now, for the time being, let's stick to the SFO, and we can press that grid button here. And you can see now that the tool gives you quite some output. You have the chi-square, which is a measure, let's say, of the goodness of fit. You have the DT50. Again, this is the same unit of the time, so in this case it's days. You have a plot, a dissipation plot, where your experimental points are in orange, and you can see it's also an interactive plot. And the fitting of the model is in blue here. So you see really the decline in the concentration. And you can also see that you have a residual plot that is useful for checking whether your model was fitting the data in a correct way. You have some options here. You can, this is an interactive plot, so you can actually zoom in if you're interested in having something specific. You can zoom out. You can actually move within the plot, so you have a bit of some options. And you can also save the plot as an image, as a PNG file. And you also have here a table reporting the results of the fitting. So they'll read the parameter value, the estimate of the parameter value, the lower and the upper confidence interval, and the p-value, in fact. Now, in our case, we're going to want to have not just one trial, because when you refine the DT50, you normally need at least 4 trials per food item per zone. So we're going to add 4 trials. You see now that 4 different tabs are popping up here. I'm just going to populate those with some data. So bear with me for a moment. The second trial, we assume it was done in Spain. I'm just going to be using focus scenarios locations here, just because my fantasy isn't, they couldn't come up with something better. And the third one is going to be in Porto, and the fourth one going to be copy and pasting some other values there, and it's Tiva in Greece. So we have all the four in the southern zone, and we can actually fit all these different trials in one go by clicking fit all trials. I'm going to show you that in a moment. You see that now you have 4 tabs there, and for each of those you have everything that I've already shown you, and you can download the report. And basically, I'm not going to show you, but basically you will have the same information. We're still having some troubles in including the plots into the download report, which is still in Excel. But you remember, you can still save the image just by clicking on that. So you can basically take that image that you saved and put it into the report if you wish to do so. So that is it for the first part, which is the fitting, let's say, of residue data. The other sub-tab within this residue dissipation section is this moving window. This moving window was conceived to help you understanding the impact that a specific DT50 can have on a specific application regime in terms of number of application and interval between application on the product between the basically the product of the MAF and the FTWA. So if you remember, we have the application we have pretty much mirror the default one. We have 2 applications with a 14 days interval. The default averaging period for Birds and Mammals is 21 days. We can, however, select either any DT50 that we want. The default is 10 days, but you can put any value. Or if you had fitted any residue data before, you can select the worst case among the ones that were fitted. So just to show you, if I move back and now go to the Seville, was that the worst case? Let me check. It should be this one. Yeah, 2.37. No, 2. So then it must be the other one. Huh? It must be Tiva. Yes, that's the worst case, 2.48. Or the geomean, which is in this case very close. And once you select that, you can press calculate, and what you get is this plot that is showing you in blue the residue dynamics, and it's again an interactive plot, so you can see at any time what is the predicted fraction of the initial. And in orange, what you see is actually the moving window that is used for calculating the time-weighted average. So as you can see, in this case, the first value is the average in between basically day 0 and day 21. And this is a very good example that is showing you why you will need to have that consideration instead of the default product of separated MAF and FTWA. What the product of MAF and FTWA does is to calculate basically this value. So the moving window that starts at the moment of the last application. And as you can see in this case, that's not the worst case. The worst case is the averaging that starts at the beginning and comprises indeed the 2 applications. So that's not unsurprising. And the actual product, the actual value, let's say, of the value of this product is reported here, and it's 0.3. And you can then play with it if you wish. So if you want to show the effect of DT50 of 10 days, you can do that, and you can see that that's changing as well. One thing that is really important to mention is that whatever you do here is not going to be taken forward in any other part of the dietary risk assessment. So this is just for you to basically understanding and play with the influence that different DT50s may have on these factors of the time-weighted average and multiple application factors, depending on your application regime. And you can download the report, and again, we don't have yet the options to download directly the image in the report, but you can download the image separately. So that was just to show you this residue dissipation, which is completely, let's say, standalone, and it's not any result that is performing here is not taken forward anywhere else in the tool. But we can move now to the actual tier 3. And we're going to start with a tier 2 example where refined DT50s are available. And you have immediately here an option to say, do you want to refine DT50 for all the scenarios in tier 2? And we're going to say yes here. And you see that immediately you have a list of all the diet items popping up. The default DT50 for everything is 10 days, but you can have refined DT50s. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So for the monocots, we're going to put 2.3 days. For the dicots, we're going to have 3.5. And then we are assuming, this is not very likely, but we're assuming that for both the ground-dwelling arthropods and the foliar-dwelling arthropods, we have the same DT50. And once we've done that, we can save it. And then when we scroll down, we have now a list of all the feeding yield and BBCH combination that apply for both birds and mammals. We're going to start with birds. So when you click on one of those, then you immediately have the options to say no refinements. So that will be tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. We're going to start with tier 2 example. And when you do that, you see that the diet item for this specific generic model species pops up. But the only thing that you can actually refine are those things related to the residue and the concentration. So you can refine the residues in terms of 90 percentile at geometric mean, in case you have additional data sets to be merged with the default one, and that will also impact, of course, the variance in the rods. You can refine the position values if you have sufficient data to do that. In our case, we are only concentrating in this example on the DT50. And as you can see, the DT50 has already been changed on the basis of what the change that we have at the beginning in this overall table. So when you only have DT50 that applies, let's say, across the board, you simply need to go through all the list of your species and select tier 2. And that's basically it. As you can see, also in this case, we have a more complicated diet of 5 items. For 4 of those, the DT50 has already been changed. For the granivorous, there's no point because we haven't changed the DT50 of any seeds. So we're just going to leave that at a tier 1 for the time being. We can change then for the small insectivorous and the small omnivorous also in the other BBCH bracket at 40 to 49. We don't need to do anything else. And we can save the input. We're going to do the same thing for mammals very quickly. So we're going to just go through the list and only select tier 2 for those that basically are meaningful to apply change. So we leave out the granivorous for the time being. And give me a second. And there we go, tier 2. It's a bit repetitive, but it allows you to really have, we wanted to keep the maximum flexibility in the choices, so to apply DT50 and specific refinement to specific cases. Remember to save the input. And now we can move back to the general tab. We're going to clear the filters. We're going to select all this time, just for sake of being fast. There we go. And now you see that all those generic model species in BBCH bracket for which there was indeed a refinement in the tier 2, that is now highlighted with a specific color in the table. So specifically for birds, as you can see now, for the reproductive, everything is now pretty much okay, except for the granivorous and the BBCH bracket 30 to 39, where you still have a high risk, and also the omnivorous, for which you still have a TR below 5. And this will be taken forward also in the summary, where you see now that the BBCH bracket 30 to 39, you have high risk, while the 40 to 49, you have a low risk. So we basically need to refine at least those 2 in order to get an overall low risk. And that is basically what we can do by showing a tier 3 example. So in order to do that, we need to go to, again, the tier 2 and tier 3. We're going to focus on birds just to be faster, let's say. Remember that the issue was mainly for the small omnivorous in BBCH bracket 30 to 39 and in the granivorous 30 to 39. So we can swap this to tier 3 instead. And you can see here that at this point, it asks for a focus species. And when you click on that, you have already a quite wide range of potential focus species to be included. In this case, for the small omnivorous is the skylark that it was identified. So when you click on the skylark, there is a new table popping up. It's telling you the focus species is skylark, automatically tells you that that belongs to the passeriformes, which is used for calculating basically the energy expenditure and so on, the body weight. And there is another question which is asking whether the data that we're going to enter on the diet are based on wet weight. In this case, we don't flag it, and the numbers of diet items. In this case, we are going to have 4 diet items. So what we're going to do now is to update the diet items table. And you see now immediately there is another big table popping up. And you also have a warning that the sum of the PD needs to add up to 1 for the focus species skylark. At the moment, we don't have anything in the PD column, so that's why we have this, this warning. The first diet item we're going to select is the monocots. And now you see there is a second warning, which is related to the location of the monocots. Obviously, we don't have a location, so it flags a problem. But even if I would say here that the monocots are, for example, on soil water, which is obviously a nonsense, then there is a warning that says that the diet item monocots cannot be found on the location soil water. And this is to prevent you from selecting something wrong, because that will cause the tool to basically return an error message and an issue later on. So for the monocot, we're going to select weeds. And the PD in this case is 0.15. We also have dicots, which is basically the crop. And the DT50, and the PD is 0.25. The third item is ground seeds, which are obviously found on the ground, and the PD fraction in this case 0.3. And the last item is foliar insects, foliar dwelling arthropods, which are found on the crop. And again, the PD is 0.3. Now, sorry, 0.3. Now, at this point, you see we have no error messages anymore, but we still have a lot of blank fields. If we're going to use the default values, that's very easy. You can just click on the use default values, and this will be automatically populated. In this case, we also have information on the PT, which is 0.69. And as Rachel has shown you before, you can simply drag and drop. One important aspect is when you move to the tier 3, any refinement that was applied at the tier 2 is not going to be taken forward. So you need to re-enter that refinement. That also is very clear from the note that is put there. So for the monocots, we had a DT50 of 2.3 days. For the dicot, it was 3.5. And ground seed, we didn't have anything, and the foliar dwelling arthropod was 1.7. Oh, sorry. Here and 1.7 here. And that's it. That's basically it. The other one that we have to refine is the granivorous bird. So I'm just going to click on that and go for the introduce focus species. That's in our case is the linnet. So you see, as soon as you start typing, it will find you the right focus species with the body weight. The diet items number is just 1 in this case. So we're going to create. Oh no, it's gone gray, unfortunately. That's really unfortunate. So we need to restart the app. Some probably connection. I hope that I saved my my session. Yeah, I did. Unfortunately, I did not save anything related to the tier 2, tier 3, but I'm gonna just do that very quickly. I'm gonna do tier 3, tier 2 at this point. For the small insectivorous, that was 1.7, and this was also 1.7. Small omnivorous, we had that tier 3. Sorry, I need to repeat that. Unfortunately, for some reason, it went wrong. I hope I can be fast enough. That's weeds. And the PD was 0.15. It's good though, so you get to see this stuff being done several times. Let's crop. Round. And this is on the crop as well. Default values for everything else. The PT was 0.69. That's it. The DT50 for this was 2.3. 3.5, 10, and 1. All right, we can save the input now. And for the carnivorous, again, tier 3, limit, 1 diet item, brown seeds, location is on the ground, P diffraction is 1. And the PT in this case is 0.52. So one thing that I did not show you is that you also have this option here, which is calculating FIR over body weight. So if you click it, it will give you what is the FIR over body weight for this specific focus species. We save the input again. Now we're just going to have to go to tier 2 for this one, which is basically 1.7 and 1.7. Save the input. And that's basically it. So we can go to the general now, select all, and apply. Yeah, and now you can see that you have different colors being used. So the first line and the fourth line, we only have the tier 2, and the second and the third line, we have the tier 3, but the last two uses are still relying on tier 1. What I wanted to show you is you can create a report for tier 2, tier 3, which is quite nice because basically all the input and output are going to be shown, and I will showing you in a moment. There you see you have this same thing, the input for the tier 2, which are basically only the DT50, they are highlighted as well. The input for the tier 3 are for these two focus species, and you see that everything that has been changed compared to the default is also highlighted. And the final output, where you can also have a differentiation between the tier being used. So that's also useful in case you have multiple users and multiple focus species to know at what stage the assessment was done. So that was basically it for the demonstration of the tier 2, tier 3. And now I will give the floor back to you, Tobin.
Thank you very much, Alessio. There we go. Thank you very much, Alessio. Thank you, Rachel, as well, for taking us through the operation of the calculator tool. We now move to the question and answer session. As mentioned before, the questions come from the registered participants at the time of registration. We move straight to our first question, and this is for you, Alessio. So will it be possible in the future to include predefined FTWA values in the EFSA calculator tool rather than having to enter all of the residue data?
Yeah, thank you, Tobin, for the question. So I was trying to convey also this message while giving the presentation. So that tab, the residue dissipation tab, is something which is completely independent from the rest of the calculation being performed in the tool, especially on the dietary part of the tool, and it's only meant as an additional help to the user. First, to provide an user-friendly software for fitting residue decline data, because to our knowledge, there isn't such a user-friendly tool so far. There was a spreadsheet was circulated some years ago, but it's not as flexible as this. And also have this additional part where you can actually see the effect of the time moving window approach being implemented on a specific application regime and a specific DT50 being used. So, but it's really not something that you need to do. As I've shown you in my example, the only thing that you need to be doing to refine FTWA and MF is just to input the proper DT50 values in the tier 2 part of the tool. And this is automatically what I wanted to say, that this automatically uses the moving window approach within the tool. So that's automatically being done. What the tool does not handle yet is more complex situations, like where the DT50 and the gap alone are not able to describe specifically the dissipation behavior, let's say. So that's something which is described in the Appendix A of the guidance document. That's not really handled yet by the tool. And also stuff where you have to consider both the dissipation of the metabolite and the active substance together. That's something that would need to be done externally from the tool for the time being. But the 99% of the cases will be done internally in the tool, and there is nothing else, no need for doing anything than putting the right DT50 values in.
Okay, thank you, Alessio. Then our second question is for Rachel. So I also heard that the calculator does not currently include risk assessment for granular formulations. Will this feature be available in a future update? Rachel.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, it's true that we have concentrated our efforts for the spray applications and for seed treatments, and that's because they are the most popular or commonly types of products that we need to assess. Furthermore, a granular application, the risk assessment scheme is completely different, so it would need a different structure within the tool. And whether we're going to add it in the future will depend on the needs of the member states. So our impression is that granular formulations are quite rare. But if we have the feedback from the member states that they would like a tool for doing the assessment, then it's something we can add in the future. Yeah, and I should also say that the guidance document hasn't really changed the approach for granular formulations. And so it's a nice to have, not really a necessity to perform a risk assessment for products that are applied as granules. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rachel. So depending a bit on feedback, whether we go ahead with adding that to the tool. The third question also for you, Rachel. So the guidance document has given the spray drift value to be used for the TAI risk assessment. Why are these not automatically included in the calculator tool?
Okay, yeah, good question. So what we did when we were trying to design the calculator tool, we really tried to think about the needs of the member states at product registration, not just for the EU level assessment. And our understanding is that a number of the member states have specific spray drift values that they use for their exposure assessments. So we didn't want to make the ones that we use at EU level fixed in the tool. So we wanted to give the flexibility to the member states to be able to use their own national specific values. If in the future that we have harmonised spray drift values that are updated, of course we can just update the tool and they can be automatic. Plus, I should say that like I said yesterday, we've clarified for each of the crop groups that you use in the Tier 1 risk assessment for spray applications, which spray drift value you should use. So it shouldn't be too much effort. And to be honest, the majority of people already know what values to use because they're exactly the same that we've been using for the non-target arthropods and the plants for probably 20 years or more. So thanks.
Thank you, very clear. We then move to question 4, and this is for you, Alessio. Will there also be an offline version of the calculator with the same functionality and reliability?
Yeah, thank you, Tobin, for the question. So I should say this tool is actually coded in R. So what you see is a user-friendly interface of basically something which is coded with the R language in YAR environment. What will be available is a package, so a set of functions in R that the people could download probably from Zenodo. We will probably put it on the EFSA knowledge junction. And so people could actually use that package to run the same calculation on a locally, let's say, installed version of R. What's not going to be available is the standard, well, it's the standalone software, piece of software that mirrors the one online with the same, let's say, kind of user interface. That's not going to be available, but the R package, yes. So that will do. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And then the 5th question, also to yourself. The use pattern page is generally quite clunky, especially when editing the gap. Can this be improved?
Yes, so that question was actually posed when we still had that version 2.02 online. We're now at version 2.05. So meanwhile, we had like 3 different new versions because we're still working on that, as it was said at the beginning. Indeed, the clunkiness of the, let's say that the use input, as well as in the tier 2, tier 3, I must say, was related to the fact that we wanted to automatize as much as possible things. So we wanted to link, for example, the possibility for selecting the spray direction to the specific crop, and we wanted to fix that. But the problem with that was, in fact, that the table was updating every time, and it was quite clunky. We removed that now. So as you've seen, you need to click. So the compromise is that you still need to do, let's say, a separate clicking every time you need to update the table. But we feel that that's a reasonable compromise because it's now much more fluid the way that you can input the values in. And I hope the user will also be satisfied with that. Thank you.
Excellent. Good to see that this has been addressed, which then takes us to our final question. And this one is for you, Rachel. And the question is, I want to do a secondary poisoning assessment, but I don't have a packed pour water for soil and sediment. The tool does not let me progress. What should I do?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good question because as we said yesterday, that we are waiting for the focus repair and for the soil exposure assessment guidance documents to be implemented before we start using the pore water for soil and sediment in the risk assessment for birds and mammals. So we are in a transition period waiting for those guidances. Probably by the time the bird and mammal guidance is implemented, I would expect those to also have been implemented. So really this problem is not going to exist in the future. However, what I would recommend that you do in the meantime is just put any value in, just put 1, for example, and then just ignore the output. You just don't use it. So you can just put any value in and progress with the tool, and it will continue with your dry soil approach and risk assessment for fish-eating birds and mammals and earthworm-eating birds and mammals. Thanks.
Very good, thank you, and indeed a number of things to look forward to that will help progress this particular aspect. So that brings us to the end of our question and answer session, and indeed to the end of this information session. Again, we remind you that the tool that we've been demonstrating to you today can be found at the link that you see on the slide in front of you. We also have a contact point for technical issues, also for general issues. You'll see for both of these the email addresses on the screen at the moment. So please don't hesitate to use these. And the next slide, please. And that really does bring us to the end. Again, a reminder that the recording of today's event will be available on our website in the coming days. Also, I'd like to remind you that the tool itself will be back online shortly after the end of this meeting, so rather shortly indeed. So you'll be able to go away and play with it and make use of the demonstration that's just been given. Again, I'd like to remind you that you will be shortly receiving an email with our evaluation survey. Please provide your feedback on that. As I said before, it helps us to improve these events. My thanks particularly today to our 2 presenters, to Rachel and to Alessio for their detailed and comprehensive presentation of this tool. And thank you for your participation to this information event. We hope it has been helpful for you, and we hope to see you again at future EFSA information sessions. With that, I bring the session to a close. Thank you all and have a great day. Bye.